Good morning, everyone. Welcome back from coffee and welcome to this Security Dynamics of the IoT Ecosystem session. My name's Martin Beecham. I'm the Senior Security Analyst at GSMA. I'm joined from GSMA by my colleague down the front here, Roger Brown. He'll be running the Q&A session if we've got a little bit of time towards the end. So IoT, I think if you look at any recent statistic on volumetrics, it'll be a really large number. You'll hear some numbers during the presentations today as well. There's a really large deployed base of IoT devices. I think it's fair to say a good proportion have had less than perfect security implementations. So there's kind of a legacy security position with IoT devices around the globe. Looking forward, though, there's equally large projections for IoT growth on the back of low-powered networks, 5G. We heard yesterday about some of the potential growth due to autonomous vehicles, and we've heard of several IoT applications that will drive bigger volumes of IoT devices. So rather than make the problem bigger from a security perspective, I'm really pleased that the industry has been doing a really big chunk of work to improve the IoT security standardization so that vendors can point to and use good implementations, and notably EN 303645 has been developed and adopted and cited quite globally. GSMA have their own IoT guidelines, and we're currently updating those as well. So we frame this session to provide views from a government viewpoint, from a certification and test viewpoint, and a viewpoint that looks at deployed real-life systems and looks at testing their actual implementation security. So I'm really pleased. I'll introduce our three speakers. Thank you for attending and supporting the event. Each of our speakers is going to do a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll have a quick Q&A if there's time at the end. At the end of that session, there's a 15-minute session that Rich is going to lead, so Roger will hand over just towards the end. So we'll run for about an hour from our start time. So our three speakers in order. So James Deacon, Head of International Standards, International Engagement and Enterprise IoT Policy at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, UK Government. I'll just do the two speakers, James. So Razma Arabi, Managing Director of ATSEC Information Security. Thank you. And Matt Lewis, Commercial Research Director at NCC Group. I'd also note both ATSEC and NCC Group are official security test labs for the GSMA's Network Equipment Security Assurance Scheme, NESAS, which was mentioned yesterday if you were here. So James, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm James Deacon from the UK's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So for those who haven't necessarily been following close attention to machinery of government changes, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology was created at the beginning of this year, carving out parts of DCMS, which at the time was the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and parts of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So the relevant parts that were sitting under the D of DCMS, everything digital and tech related, and the relevant parts of the Department for Business carved into this nice new department, DCIT. So if you were following the IoT work that was happening in DCMS, that work, the same people, the same work, the same ambitions has all just come across seamlessly to DCIT. So our team's core objective is to protect users, networks and infrastructure from vulnerable connected devices, or IoT. And we really see three spheres where we're active. So the first of these is consumer IoT. I think everyone here probably knows what I mean when I say that. The second area that we're active is enterprise IoT. So this is things like VoIP phones, meeting room panels, that sort of a thing you'd find in a fairly typical office environment and you'd expect businesses to be using. And then the last one is industrial IoT. So operational technologies and the industrial IoT, where we're seeing those really interesting themes around increasing connectivity in systems that historically have been air-gapped, becoming increasingly connected, huge benefits that come from that, huge potential cybersecurity issues as well. So for us, our work started on consumer IoT. So our team was created in response to the Mirai botnet, which struck in late 2016. And we publicly sort of came to the public's realization when in 2018, we released our code of practice for consumer IoT. So it was a set of encouragements for industry to take on board, which if built in from the design stage would encourage a security by design approach. The response we overwhelmingly got back from industry was that if we wanted to see this change happen, that we needed to actually put some regulatory teeth behind it, and that is exactly what we did. So we had a number of years where we had public consultations, refining our ideas, making sure that people understood the process, and we got really valuable feedback there. And that led to 2021, when we introduced the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act, a little bit more widely known as the PSTI Act. And it's the product security part of the PSTI Act that's really interesting. It introduces some basic cybersecurity requirements on consumer IoT devices. No default passwords, transparency about the length of time you'll provide software updates, and a means for vulnerabilities to be reported to the manufacturer. So 3 security requirements, and that will come into force officially at the end of next April. So a huge piece of work for us at the moment is we have received Royal Assent, which is fantastic. The law is ready to go. We're now working to make sure that the enforcement authority, which is OPSS, the Office for Product Safety and Standards, that they're set up, they know what they need to do, and it's for us about communicating to make sure that everyone in that supply chain of consumer IoT understands the obligations that they're going to have under this new framework. We're very mindful of the fact that the UK is not an isolated case. If we solve consumer IoT cybersecurity here, that doesn't mean that UK consumers are safe. Insecure devices elsewhere in the world can affect us, and obviously vice versa. So building an international community, supporting international efforts to ensure that there is a standardized approach in the broadest sense of the word has been a big mission for us. So our code of practice aligns with the ETSI EN 303645, a standard that UK is incredibly happy to support and to be very active in its development. And we've seen that adopted much more broadly internationally, which has been fantastic. We try to be as active in standards bodies as we can. So although we're a small team, we try to go to the relevant meetings in ETSI, ISO, CEN, CENELEC, and ITU. We don't manage to get to all of them, but our aim is to make sure that where there is work happening to standardize the cybersecurity of IoT, that we're there encouraging people to look at the hard work that's already being done and to build on the existing work rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So in terms of international alignment, so our legislation takes the first 3 security requirements of our code of practice, and that's the same as the ETSI EN 303645 requirements. And we've seen very similar schemes adopted, whether it's codes of practices, so we saw India and Australia have codes of practices that align with the UK and that same ETSI standard. We've also seen labelling schemes, so Singapore, Finland, Germany, and others have got schemes that again align with what the UK is doing, but also with what all these other countries that are looking at the ETSI standard are doing. And more broadly for us, it's about encouraging people through other means as well. So we've made sure that IoT was included in the UK-India cyber statement. So the UK and India are going to work closely together to make sure we're promoting an aligned view on that. The UK-Japan digital partnership, another one where, again, it's the same story. We're making sure that we're putting this on the agenda with countries that we're having these conversations with to figure out how we can work together on a unified vision. And then other important things, for example, the World Economic Forum released a statement in 2022 where they were talking about the importance of a unified global approach, the importance of standards, and highlighting this as a very good way for that to be done. I could talk about the consumer IoT stuff for a while, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to enterprise IoT. So this for us is a newer piece of work that's been going on for the last couple of years. What we were doing for the first part of this was really understanding the state of play as it currently is. So in 2021, We released a business survey and a literature review, and we had the National Cybersecurity Centre do a publicly available assessment into the state of play. All those documents are available on the relevant gov.uk website. And what we were finding overwhelmingly was that devices are adopting these technologies, but often they either weren't doing any checks from a cybersecurity perspective, they didn't know where to look to get the right information, and therefore even people who wanted to do the right thing didn't have any guidance as to what they could do. So we were working in conjunction with NCSC, and in 2022 released the Device Security Principles. Very similar to the UK's Code of Practice for Consumer IoT, it was about establishing what we think a good level of cybersecurity in enterprise IoT devices looks like. So written in the style of the international standards so that it's broadly understandable to industry and using language they're already familiar with. It's about having that secure by design approach so that if a manufacturer is doing these things, they know that they are building in a good level of cybersecurity. And it's not just for manufacturers. The flip side to that is if there are businesses that are purchasing enterprise IoT devices, they can use this as the basis for a procurement framework. They can use this as a checklist to say, here's what the government is saying good looks like. How much of this are you currently meeting? So a recent piece of work that we've been wrapping up is a product testing grant. So looking at the most commonly used types of enterprise IoT devices, understanding whether they are expensive, whether they are a low-cost option, what is the base level of cybersecurity built into these products, and how could existing international standards and government guidance support it? We've not yet publicly released the report, but it will be coming soon, we hope. But the short of it is that the level of cybersecurity across these commonly used devices was very poor. There was incredibly out-of-date software, there were fairly basic errors, there was issues around, for example, default passwords still being used. So it's clear that there is a huge amount of work to do and that the vast majority of devices seem to not yet be meeting the standards that we would expect them and hope that they would. What that work will hopefully culminate in is going to be a public consultation later this year. We want to do in a bit more of a public way, capture the work we've done to date, so all of that research, the new research that we're commissioning, and give people an opportunity to weigh into what the government's done so far, understand possible interventions that we're exploring, and it's a chance for people to give feedback on that. So if it is something that you are interested in, please keep your eyes open because we really do need as much feedback as we can to incorporate into our policy making so that we make the best possible decisions. I'm just going to touch very quickly on industrial IoT. This is for us a much earlier stage piece of work, but it's incredibly interesting. What we're seeing is that devices that historically have been air-gapped and have been on their own networks are increasingly connected into wider networks, and we're seeing this convergence between IT and OT. There's obviously business benefits and efficiencies that can be derived from that, but there is a lot of issues around cybersecurity. So there's that increased risk of industrial control systems and OT ransomware once you get it built into the network. And there's also the actual basics of the security foundations. So if you have an insecure light bulb as a consumer, it's relatively straightforward to take it out, replace it, update it, etc. If we're talking about the bits of technology that power critical national infrastructure, it is not as simple a case of simply being able to swap these things out on no notice or being able to patch them as easily, etc. So when there are security issues, it's significantly more costly and it's significantly more difficult to update them. And the lifespan of these things is decades rather than years or months. So I'm conscious that I have covered an awful lot of ground in a fairly short space of time. But if you're interested in the work we're doing on consumer IoT, whether it's the legislation, wanting to understand our work on standards or anything else, whether it's the enterprise IoT and you want to stay up to date on the work we're doing there and learn more about the consultation, or you have good ideas on OT cybersecurity, then please come and grab me, because I'm around all day.
Thanks, James. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Rasma Arabi. Rasma, thank you.
So hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well, and thank you very much GSMA for inviting me. So let's see, let's start the presentation. I work for AdSec Information Security. That's a private company that performs assessments. We are rather small, but we are global. We love working with the standards. So we do a lot of common criteria evaluations, we do FIPS validations, and also, as it was mentioned, we are one of the labs that are performing or active on the GSMA NASA, so we're performing both GSMA NASA's audits of the manufacturer's development and life cycle, and also we do testing. So here today I will be speaking about the IoT devices, and my actually talk will complement some of the things that James was talking about, so I will focus on the requirements and also on the regulations. So the IoT numbers are growing. So right now we have pretty much 15 billion of IoT devices that are connected. What is expected that by 2027 there will be 29 billion IoT devices to be connected. So that's more than double of the amount of devices that we have today. Unfortunately, with this number, huge number of the IoT devices, the attacks are also are rising. So what we had just last year is over 112 million different attacks. Some of the attacks probably you have heard about. So you have for consumer devices, you have the baby monitors, toys that have been hacked that basically left to attackers. They could access the videos, the microphone, and other sensitive data. We have the Mirai botnet, which was at the time when it came, so that was in 2016, infected more than 600,000 IoT devices in 164 different countries, and formed a huge botnet that took down websites, the government website, financial website, for 4 hours. So that is really, and this is now we are talking about 2016. It seems that the problem is solved. It's not. So we have different variants of the Mirai and other botnets that are being still exploited and employed. Just to give another example, and thermostats will get a bad reputation after this presentation, I guess. So there was one example of a smart thermostat that is installed in a fish tank, so fish aquarium. And what the attackers could do, they could hack the thermostat, and then they could actually hack the attached network. Well, it could have been a home user, but it was not, so that was a casino. So what the attackers did through this thermostat, they got access to the casino's internal network, they got access to sensitive data in the databases, they pulled information through the thermostat and the connected services to the cloud. So that is one example of thermostats and what kind of possibilities it actually and what kind of attacks it opens up to. So it's actually the IoT devices enable different kind of IoT attacks. Another example of thermostats, so that was the attack happened actually in Finland. We have a similar also example in Sweden. But in the Finnish example, what we had 2 apartment buildings. It was cold Finnish winter, and the thermostat stopped working due to the attack. What actually it meant that these 2 buildings and people living there, they didn't have access to heating or warm water. The attackers compromised the thermostat, and basically when those that try to maintain the IoT device or the thermostat, they tried to reboot it. They entered a reboot circle, so it was just rebooting all the time, and basically it stopped working. So as you can see, there are a lot of different attacks. Most of them could be stopped by very easy countermeasures. So we'll see that we have weak passwords, outdated software, unsafe communication, everything that all the security people working with security knows about. That is what it's do. So they're basically the attacks that are not so complicated. IoT leads to attacks, lead to information leaks, denial of service, botnet attacks, and all the different other types of attacks as well. So just a few examples. So best practices and requirements, there are a few. Actually, there are a lot of them. Majority of them were started, or the governments especially started looking into that after the Mirai botnet. So majority of these standards, they started or were written at in 2018, 19, 20. Some of them, they are being updated as well. So the ETSI work has been already mentioned. So I think what is good there is that you have baseline requirements, and then there that are being adopted in different countries. What we have already heard about the GSMA IoT security guidelines, so that work that was is published. There are few documents that provide guidelines, very broad guidelines that could be adopted to a wide type of IoT devices, and the work is being updated right now. So if you want to participate or interested in, I'm sure the GSMA could help you with that. What I would also like to mention from this list is the initiative that is in the US. So what you have, the foundational cybersecurity activities for IoT device manufacturers. So that was 2 years ago, where there was a presidential order, executive order that was issued to look into these issues. And that is that mainly started the work that NIST is doing, and we will look into that a little bit. Some of the best practices that we see here, those apply to very broad categories of IoT devices, and some of them are very specific. So for example, there are some guidelines that are for medical devices, automotive, mobile devices, and some of them would be applicable to majority of the devices. So the ETSI work, it actually contains of multiple or different parts. So first of all, you have the baseline requirements. Then you have also the assessment specifications, so how to perform assessments against this standard. And also it provides the implementation guidance. So the work itself, it was published in 2019. And that was based on the TC cyber work that was published a year earlier, as well as the UK regulations that were published in 2018. So what it provides, it has 13 different recommendations, so just a few are mentioned here. The recommendations are very generic. So for example, no universal default passwords, that's a known thing. Communicate securely, minimize exposure to attack surfaces. So those just a few. So the next standard, so NIST, as I said here, they are looking into the IoT devices, and what is really interesting that IoT devices often are not only the IoT devices, and that is actually looked into this standard as well. So what they talk about IoT devices, and they also talk about IoT products. So IoT device is a more or less very simple computing element and transducer with a network connection or a sensor. And then for IoT product, it would contain of one of such IoT devices. It could have many different IoT devices. But what such IoT product often needs, it needs an application, so an app on your Android or an iOS. It also needs some cloud services and basically some kind of a backend. So all of a sudden, it becomes very complicated ecosystem to look at. So this is something that NIST is looking at and trying to address in the standards they are developing and writing at the moment. Just to mention also the ISO standards. So these standards, the first one, the 62443, is written, it's not for consumer IoT devices. It's actually, the standard is addressing industrial automation and control systems. So it's not specifically written for IoT devices. but it is used as such. So there are quite a few IoT devices, especially in the industrial setup, that have been evaluated according to the standard. It provides regulations for the secure development lifecycle and the technical system component requirements. Some of the technical system component requirements you will also here see on the slide. And once again, it talks about identification, authentication control, use control, system integrity, and so on and so on. Just to mention a few ongoing work as well that is performed by ISO. So what we have is two standards under development. We have the device baseline requirements, so standard 27402, so it's not yet published. And also ISO is working on the security labeling framework for consumer IoT devices, so that is something that is being worked on. And the absolutely last one for the standards, so we have the Cloud Security Association for IoT Controls. It has is focusing on the enterprise, so slightly different focus. What they do here is they provide a way to assess and a way to do risk assessment for the protection of the organizational assets. There are 3 different versions of these framework already developed and published. So the first one actually included 160 controls, and now the latest one includes up to 198 controls. So what about compliance? So we have all these different standards. We have security guidelines. We have national regulators are engaging and looking into that. And why is it not helping, or is it actually helping at all? We don't know the answer. We see that the attacks are rising. One thing I would like to suggest is that the device manufacturers need to take responsibility for the devices and for security of the devices and the services that they provide. In this case, actually, regulations could help. So similar to the ones that was presented in the UK, I know that the next speaker will talk a little bit more about that as well. And also for regulations, usually you need some certification schemes. So when it comes to certification schemes, and that is for any certification schemes, you need mainly 2 key components. So the first of all, you need the criteria, the standard to apply. And then also you need the audit methodology or testing methodology that needs to be applied. So the first one, usually for the standard, that is something that the manufacturer would follow. And then for the second one, usually the evaluators, the company like ours, like NCC, would follow, and to ensure conformance to the standards. So here, actually, I think the big challenge right now is that we have a lot of initiatives on the national level. But what we want to see, and what we know, that IoT products are global products. So basically, manufacturers of IoT devices now need to comply with different requirements in different countries. And they cannot go in all directions. So I think what we need to provide them is one direction that they could go. And one set of standards, or couple of set of standards, with basically there's some more guidance than that is provided at this very moment. When it comes to schemes, the schemes are different. So sometimes you have the national schemes, you have the international recognized schemes, you have industry-driven schemes. So here's a short slide about the IoT certification schemes. So Indian scheme, it was already mentioned. We have also Korean scheme that is available. The Australian government is working on the scheme. The US government is working on the scheme. The international recognized schemes, and those were already mentioned as well. So you have the Finnish, Singaporean, and the German schemes. What is unique about them is that they recognize each other's results. So basically, in the schemes, you have different levels of assessments, and certain levels are are recognized, the results of these assessments are recognized across the schemes. So just to summarize this a little bit, so for IoT certification ecosystem, as we saw, there are a lot of different guidelines, security requirements. Some of them were published some years ago. They are being reworked, and much more will come. What we also see that the certification scheme for IoT sometimes focus on one selected standard, which is really great. And that is the ETSI standards. So we saw the different national agencies that have been adopting that. What we also see that some schemes are trying to adopt multiple standards. So there is a scheme that is called CESIP. It is developed by Global Platform. It allows definition of CESIP profiles. What the CESIP profiles do, they address requirements in different standards, and that's how you can also use the scheme to show compliance to those. Another such scheme that I would like to also mention, or work that I would like to mention, is the Connectivity Standards Alliance. What they are working on is they are working on defining a superset requirements that would include both the ETSI requirements and also requirements from NIST. In the certification schemes, we see that sometimes they are focused on IoT devices, IoT products. Sometimes they look into the whole ecosystem or just the IoT platform. We have already talked about the industrial, consumer, enterprise IoTs, and those items are being addressed. Use cases are being addressed. Also, for the requirement specifications, sometimes we look in the technical capabilities, so that is more or less just the functional requirements. And sometimes we also see that the security development lifecycle requirements are also there in the standard, which I think are extremely important. Different levels of certification exist in these schemes as well. So sometimes you have just one level. In some cases, you have 5 different levels. Sometimes you have 7 different levels. For these different levels, not always the test labs are involved at the lowest levels. For example, the manufacturers could do self-assessment and others, and then for the higher levels, the test labs would also be there. Labeling certification schemes are being established. I have to say I haven't seen one myself, so I haven't bought any device that had any security label yet, but I expect that actually that will happen probably next year or the year after that. And then IoT certification challenges. So I think manufacturers are facing a lot of challenges. As we saw, the number of IoT devices just in 4 years will double. So they are under pressure. They are producing a lot of devices. They struggle with the return on investment and time to market. That's 2 struggles. The other struggle that I would mention is the security patches. Over-the-year updates are easy to deploy to users. So for example, on my mobile phone, I get these security updates. I can install them. What do I do with other devices that I probably would be still available for a very long time? The manufacturers may not be interested into providing any security updates for them, but the devices would be still used. On the user side, on the industrial and the consumer, I think I will just mention Internet of Forgotten Things. I mean, the thermostat example, it will show you everything, right? You forget about that you have such a device because there are so many, and that is really a security challenge. Installing security patches for the users is also a problem. Actually, there was the case where a smart lock was hacked. That smart lock was installed at the hotel. So what the hotel personnel need to do is to update every single lock from door to door. So this is manual labor, it's manual work, as I said. So this automated security updates do not work. Also, in combination with low security awareness, it makes the situation very much worse. So I think regardless of the certification schemes that would come up in the future, it is important very much to educate the people to understand what the certification actually means, what the obligations are, and how they can keep the IoT devices secure. For common standards and regulation requirements, I will refer to the next speaker. I think he will talk a little bit about that. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Rasmus. We've seen a government perspective. We've seen Rasmus introduce kind of the breadth of regulation and guidelines out there, which is really encouraging. The next thing is really getting them deployed in the wild. And delighted to hear Matt's view on testing and what you see in the real world. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. Sound, hear me okay? All good? Okay, brilliant. So, very briefly, NTC Group, we're a global cybersecurity organization and risk mitigation specialists based in North America, UK, APAC, all around Europe. About 1,800 technologists worldwide who are routinely doing security assessments, risk management and governance work across all sectors, all technologies. One of the things, many things that we do is IoT security. That's everything from the security testing of, say, an end device to understand its security properties, its features, to get some assurance. But we also like to, where we can, work with the actual IoT manufacturers and vendors themselves, preferably early on in their design phases. We help them threat model and understand the likely use cases of their IoT devices, the context in which they'll be used, and therefore where the vulnerability might lie, so that we can hopefully early on design and develop security controls by design into IoT devices. So what I'm going to talk about in my session is try and give some food for thought around security testing, and where, from my experience, having been doing this for well over 10 years, specifically around IoT, where there are still some further considerations around what it means to think about security testing of IoT, specifically moving beyond just thinking about the device, the actual end device itself. And I got some examples to help sort of try and bring this to life and get some food for thought. So, an example in the domestic IoT space, but this is domestic IoT. The same principles apply in enterprise IoT, industrial IoT. It's exactly the same thing, but I'm using this for a hopefully relatable context for everyone. Probably most people here by now have a home network similar to above. You have a lot of smart devices, smart TVs, maybe Amazon Alexas, Ring doorbells, that sort of stuff. And that's all within your home network, your home perimeter. Traditionally, or still today actually, a lot of misconception about the security properties of, I guess, IoT devices. Well, it's in your home, it's protected physically. Yeah, you know, what's the concern? Even if you've got default passwords, it doesn't matter. You have to be on the network in the first place to access it. What's the issue? So a few examples. Firstly, there's a lot of wireless interfaces, not just the Wi-Fi connection to your home broadband network, but that's an obvious entry point from attackers if they can find a way to get into your home Wi-Fi network. But there are lots of other interfaces like Bluetooth, NFC, other ones like Zigbee. All of these could present a new attack vector into your home network. And yes, that will require a physical proximity by the attacker to your home base, so they have to be within range to try and attack these devices. They are all these additional things that have to be considered about what it means for the IoT device to be secure. So in terms of a local area attack, an attacker in vicinity might be able to bypass some controls on, say, Bluetooth or Zigbee to get unauthorized access to a device. But it is also possible to get remote access. We often tend to forget that we'll bring into our homes our laptops, our mobile phones, which have been out and about connecting to all manner of untrusted networks. That or we might get phished and might not realize that. And if an attacker has a foothold on one of our mobile devices, that then gives them that foothold to then start probing and exploiting any vulnerabilities within that home, hitherto trusted environment. So these attackers could be anywhere the other side of the globe. They don't have to be physically within the physical presence of the devices to try and attack them. You also have the web or cloud account attack. Most IoT devices exist to generate some data which goes up to the cloud for some analysis or pulling back through your mobile apps. Your mobile app doesn't typically draw data or web feeds or video feeds directly from, say, your camera. It'll get that from a centralized web server. So if I, as an attacker, want to try and get access to all the video streams of a particular brand of doorbells, that vulnerability might be existing in the cloud ecosystem. It might be a backdoor or a weak password that lets me access all the video feeds over the internet. I'm not touching the home network, but it's another way to get access, unauthorized access to that data, that possibly quite private and sensitive data. And then you also have what we call cascade attacks, whereby you might attack one device to then use that to leverage an attack against another device. And that could happen multifold in a whole thread or a whole chain of different attacks. And this is a fairly contrived example, but actually a potentially legitimate real-world one. And we have proved this example in our labs, whereby you might have a connected door lock, which syncs up to your Amazon Alexa, whereby you can issue a voice command to say, open the front door. That might sound scary, and why would you need that functionality? But legitimately, people with disability or illness that can't get to the front door might legitimately use that functionality to let their carers or their loved ones in when they come to visit. But we found there was a famous example from a few years ago, what was called the Kayla doll. A Bluetooth-enabled doll that you could pair a phone with it, and then you could send audio through it. The child could have an interactive experience with the doll. The issue being, by design, that doll lacked any authentication on the Bluetooth pairing. So anybody within range of that doll could pair with a Bluetooth device and start streaming audio. So we showed that you could connect to that doll, issue a door unlock command if there was the door lock in vicinity, then that would unlock the door. So suddenly, when you start thinking about this, very sinister scenario, but if you were after trying to kidnap a child, for example, you know they're in the house, they have the door, you pair to the device, you send in the audio to say, come and open the door, and then you have a realistic potential abduction attack. It's quite sinister, but it's perfectly believable. And my point here being that quite often when we think about security testing of IoT, we just think very narrowly about, okay, has it got passwords, etc. But we have to think beyond that in terms of the context that it will be used in, what other devices might it interact with, and what could that mean for the end-to-end potential attack scenarios. Just a few more examples specifically on some smart video doorbells. We've worked a lot the past few years with UK consumer champion Which, who do a lot of product and service comparisons to inform consumers to allow them to make educated choices about their purchases. We elected to look at copycat brands of Amazon Ring doorbells. There's a surprisingly large amount of these devices available on eBay, Amazon, other online marketplaces. And you can see they look remarkably similar, but they're complete copycats, very sort of white-labeled Chinese tech. Very little to no security in them. We looked at 11 different brands, copycat brands, and saw all sorts of interesting things. One of them was sending the Wi-Fi credentials of the home network unencrypted to a backup server in China for whatever reason. We don't think it was particularly an overtly nefarious act. It was trying to do a backup, but somebody could have accessed that back-end server and get everybody's Wi-Fi credentials with the GPS coordinates of that doorbell and the house that it was attached to, which is quite concerning. So that's an example of the web-based attack, which could give you quite a lot of useful, harmful information as an attacker. As I mentioned, we saw a lot of white-labeled aspects, so quite commonly, one IoT device is the same thing, but rebranded in different packaging, different color, molded plastics. This is quite common, specifically in the domestic IoT space. We saw examples of recordings, again, being sent up to the cloud and unencrypted, and critical vulnerabilities out of the box. This was an interesting one whereby one of the brands had a critical vulnerability in one of its core components that was exposed maybe 10 years ago, but this vulnerability was still in this product. Possibly this product was on the shelf for 5 years before being bought. It's another interesting example about how security assessment is a point-in-time thing. And so even if you get to a point, for example, whereby you've demonstrated security labeling and security compliance of a device, in the time between that sat on a shelf in a warehouse to when it's purchased and deployed by a consumer, it could have in that time become completely exposed and vulnerable due to some new revelations about vulnerability in its technology stack, which is an interesting thing to consider also. So in terms of drivers for IoT security testing, I know a lot of this has been talked about already, so I won't sort of double up on it. But there are some things happening in the UK specifically around the Product Security Telecoms Infrastructure Act, which is now pushing some baseline security requirements. I guess what will be interesting to see is how this manifests into any level of mandate, actual security testing requirements by independent third-party auditors, for example, and what the consequences might be for any manufacturers who fail to meet those baseline requirements. Something I wanted to call out here specifically as well around nuance of security requirements and what it means to test these things is when you say things like banning default passwords, I think most of us, our instinct is to think about the password that the user would use to access the device, how they interact with it. But many or most IoT devices will have layered levels of passwords. There might be a password uniquely between how it communicates with a mobile app. There might be a password, a hard-coded password in terms of how it communicates with the remote web server. So it's very important that we understand what it means when we say no default passwords, but equally how we ensure we're testing and validating everywhere where there could be a password and where that password could be default or weak. There's been some other good things in the UK, like the Certified Product Assurance Scheme coming through the National Cybersecurity Centre, specifically for smart meters, gas and electricity. NCC is a certified CPA lab, and for a number of years we've been certifying a large number of gas and electricity meters through that, and that has some very strict requirements about security, a lot of, on a technical level, requirements to do fuzz testing and stress testing of the protocols as well, to demonstrate robustness in the quality of the product and how it handles different types of input. It's been mentioned a lot about different certification schemes. ETSI, IOXT is another one, and obviously the security kite marks or labels. Something I wanted to call out there, a general word of caution from a personal perspective around kite marks or labels. And I'll give an anecdote from last year where our labs in Canada had done a lot of work on the Bluetooth protocol and identified a critical vulnerability at the base layer of the Bluetooth protocol, which they were able to show manifested in a number of different products that use Bluetooth. Specifically, they demonstrated a remote keyless attack against Tesla vehicles. And the issue there was that because it's a vulnerability inherent in the protocol, there's no fix until the Bluetooth protocol is updated and then that's put back into a new piece of hardware. You can't easily send a software patch to fix this. So long story short, NCC Group is working with the Bluetooth Alliance on what that new protocol might be. But a point here being, suppose that the Tesla had achieved a kite mark or a baseline security assessment with the thumbs up. The issue is when you get these vulnerabilities that manifest themselves in hardware that can't easily be replaced, what does that mean for security labeling? Suddenly you might have a bunch of devices, thousands that you've shipped with a label on it saying it's secure, but since that time, a critical vulnerability has been identified, and therefore that's completely nullified the security promises of that device. So something to think about in that realm. And a lot of, I mentioned, and purposefully, I guess, re-emphasizing the point about how a lot of the certification, the testing, the standards is still very much focused on the device itself. But hopefully what you're getting from what I'm saying is that we have to consider the broader ecosystem of IoT, the whole end-to-end connection, the cloud infrastructures, and how that all comes together as one unified end-to-end solution, what it means to actually secure that end-to-end solution. So there are great security principles, lots of international consensus. We've mentioned ETSI a lot. Oversight on my part, apologies, GSMA got their own principles and guidance there as well, which are currently being updated. The IoT Security Foundation, and this one recently on the left, quite a nice collaboration between a number of global security agencies, the UK National Cyber Security Agency, the German equivalent, FBI, Canadian, etc. And this is a bunch of broader principles about how you should go about designing secure products, what that means beyond just the product, but your development processes, how you embed security by design into that. But again, what I want to call out from experience here around these types of principles is while they're absolutely great, they make 100% sense in terms of what they're saying, a lot of IoT manufacturers, particularly some of the less mature ones, some of the entry-level startups, have no idea or little idea about a lot of the concepts mentioned in these principles. They'll talk about things like have a vulnerability disclosure process and be able to react to when somebody identifies a CVE in your product. They don't know what it means, what CVE means. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty about the concepts in these principles. So I think we, I guess, have a duty to help organizations understand and translate these principles rather than assume it's a given that once we write these and put them out there, that everybody knows what they mean and can understand easily how to interpret them and implement them. Again, I won't go into detail because I know between the three of us we've covered these, but just an example of how, you know, globally there are different things happening in different countries, different approaches to cybersecurity regulation, legislation, which is, I guess, the precursor then to, hopefully, security testing. You need to test to validate and to be able to prove the assurance that these acts or these legislations or these regulations are requiring. From our side, and why we're interested in this NCC group is, and we leverage our public affairs team really well here, is it's important for us that our testing methodologies, our labs, our approaches are aligned and able to adapt and cater for the different requirements that different countries are expecting within their IoT ecosystems. So there's lots of principles, guidance, standards, regulation, but, you know, what about testing? There are various labs. Again, it's come up a few times. IOXT is one. I mentioned that just because we have familiarity. NCC Group is a certified IOXT lab. There's PSA certified, another one. There are many others, and this is a good approach whereby you have a certified, validated lab who can demonstrate competence in doing security testing of IoT, and they should be routinely audited themselves to make sure that their methodologies and approaches are up to date. But there's still, I guess, currently, there's no pervasive consensus-based international approach to what it means to do a security test of IoT, because how you test something is very different to how you plan and regulate and legislate. There's a big sort of interpretation piece there between what it means to look through these requirements and what that translates to into specific testing and testing outcomes. Just an example from IOXT, for example, you can put a number of different device types through that. Google put their Pixel 4 through a few years ago, and that was one that we specifically worked on. But you can do anything from smart light bulbs through to GPS pet trackers. And what IOXT does, just as an example, is they have a bunch of different device profiles. So they will consider the thing I mentioned a bit more about what is the context of this device and its use case. And the profile then establishes the way you go about testing that to have it a bit more real world and applicable to the end scenarios the devices would be used in and operated. So just to conclude around security testing, as I mentioned, there's not much international standardization on the testing itself, although, you know, there's great principles, guidance, schemes coming up that will inevitably drive, I guess, a lot more security testing requirements and development of methodologies and testing schemes for IoT. Again, to just reiterate, you know, we have to think about not just the device, it's about the entire ecosystem and what that means for the end-to-end security. And that should form part of the, well, it should form the scope of what we mean by IoT security testing. I mentioned again the context of the use case of the device really needs to be understood. You know, exactly where will this be used? What will it interact with? What types of people? What countries will it be used in? Is there a geopolitical aspect to the nature of this device and what it does? I think this is really important to consider this as part of the security testing schedule or approach for an IoT device. And then, yes, just reiterating again, Brian mentioned about how, you know, certification and assessment is a point-in-time thing. We have to be clear that, you know, we can't say this is secure and that's a for the rest of time assertion. Things change, new vulnerabilities might be identified, so we have to be able to adapt to that and be able to, as best as we can, manage those situations. Yes, software updates and firmware updates is a good thing to do, particularly if that can be done timely. But in IoT, with it being more of an embedded hardware device, if these critical vulnerabilities are identified in hardware components that you can't update via software, we still have to understand what that means in terms of security assurance and how we manage that in a IoT ecosystem. And then it's going to be interesting in general, I mentioned again about what the effect will be or what it means for any devices that fail to meet the expected standards and regulations, and when security testing demonstrates that they've fallen short. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Will we see devices actually banned from marketplaces? Will there be some regulatory fines on IoT manufacturers? All TBD, but it'll be interesting to see how and where security testing will play a role in providing that evidential piece about how and where IoT devices are performing or not in terms of IoT security. There's my details for after today's session. If anyone wants to reach out and ask any further questions, please do. But thank you very much.
So thank you very much for our speakers for this session. We've covered that sort of governmental viewpoint. We've looked at some of the broader guidelines and frameworks for IoT and some of the horror stories and war stories for actually testing some of those real-world implementations. Thank you for Roger for being on standby for Q&A. I don't think we'll have time for that today because I want to keep us on time for the final session, final part of this session. I'll hand over to Rich, but thank you very much for our speakers. Thank you.
So thanks very much. I think we've heard a lot of stuff around connectivity. We've heard obviously around eSIM. We've heard about IoT. And what I wanted to try and do is just round off this morning's session. We're trying to bring some of that technology to life. So we'll have Unmanned Life that's going to give us an overview of their product. It's all around drones. It's actually come through the GSMA Foundry. The GSMA Foundry is the innovation hub within GSMA where we try to bring to market new products, capabilities, solve industry challenges, and attempt to do those in a way of bringing the coalition of the willing together, trying to, with everybody committed to results, bringing together industry and also connectivity partners to make those things happen. And this is one of the projects which we had within the Foundry, and I think it will be a real-life example of bringing a technology, what we've heard about today, to life into something real and practical. So over to you.
Great. So thank you very much, Richard. My name is Jorge Munoz. I'm one of the co-founders of Unmanned Life. Unmanned Life is a software platform for seamless orchestration of autonomous robotics. As Rich mentioned, we do drones, but we also connect with other devices. It could be ground vehicles, robotic arms, legged robots, and we combine them and create fleets of autonomous robotics. Pretty much think about Unmanned Life as a brain that is able to deploy, control, and orchestrate these robots. A bit of us. So we are located here in London. It's our headquarters, and we have our tech offices in Barcelona. We have been invested by Telefonica and Telus, so we know how to work with telcos and with network, right? And we have been supported by the GSMA Foundry. We were one of the awarded companies in 2022. Pretty much what we do is that we're leveraging the power of 5G, edge computing, AI, and IoT into one platform to enable full autonomous operations with these robots in enterprises. The problem that we're solving is the fragmentations of systems. In order to deploy full autonomous solutions, the end users need to connect these devices, these robots, to the network, to business information systems, sensors, analytics, and it's a very difficult task to accomplish. That's why we have created Unmanned Life, which is this platform that, this is the architecture basically. If you go from left to right, you'll see that we have the hardware, right? So we are hardware agnostics. We integrate the hardware with the network to connect them to the central brain, right? This brain gives intelligence to these devices, and we enable applications at scale. We're network interoperable, so we can operate with almost any kind of networks. Of course, we prefer to work with 5G, it's more reliable, and we combine 5G and edge computing to have the best of the technology. So we're here to talk about drones and drones for security. So first of all, if we go to a simple drone that is manually controlled, what are the advantage of it? It's a mobile camera, so you have a larger coverage areas and also faster. What if you automate this drone? So basically you have 24/7 operations and, well, it's cost efficient. Our approach at Animal Life is to have a software platform that is enabling these applications with autonomous drones, that basically the benefits of it is the scalability, right? So you can scale very easy. I'm just going to stop here talking about Animal Life because I'm very pleased to be today here to present our brand new product, right, which is powered by our platform, but is basically responding to the end-to-end solution when it comes to security. I have a video that will explain how it works. So officially it's launched. This is our product. It's called uSecurity, right? Basically it's a full autonomous drone in a box solution, which has seamless orchestration and integration to 5G connectivity. We're enabling AI capabilities on the operations and we're BPLOs ready. So we are ready to launch missions remotely without the need of a pilot seeing into the operation. Pretty much the software features. First of all, we are enabling swarm orchestration. Here we are orchestrating, again, with robots, with devices, and with IoT sensors. We are enabling artificial intelligence on the operations. We have a modular platform, so it can be hosted in different infrastructures. And as I mentioned already, we network interoperable. We're also offering, for the very first time, a package that comes with hardware, right? So our business has been, till now, focused on software, but today we are pushing for the hardware as well. So it's a combination of what we call UL box, which is enabling the 5G connectivity into the drones, cameras, the docking station, which is basically a charging station to enable 24/7 autonomous operations, and a weather tower, which is going to giving us basically measurements on if it's raining, wind, and then with the cameras itself, basically we can enable HD video streaming, thermal streaming as well, and night vision, again, to enable 24/7 operations. What are the use cases that you can enable in here? First of all, situation awareness, so you will be able to send the drone to react to any sort of threat on your premises. Intrusion detection with AI, so we're detecting people, and thermal detection to detect not only people during the night, but also if, for instance, there is fire or even to do some sort of identification of fires and incidents. Our web interface is very it's very easy to use. We have basically the selection of the hardware, which go to configure the mission, and where basically you launch the mission and you have real-time video streaming into the interface. Pretty much, we've been testing this with Telefonica and with Telus in Canada, and the numbers are quite exciting. We're calculating already a 12x ROI based on all of this data that I'm showing in here. With one single flight, we can cover 100 hectares per drone. Basically, you can start a mission in less than a minute, right? Of course, we're available 24/7, and you have the gimbal control of the camera, so you have a 360 view for the operations. Pretty much the early adopters, these are the industries today that adopting this solution. So mining, ports, oil and gas, power and utilities. These 4 industries are very much they have the same needs, right, when it comes for security issues and also inspections. Important to mention here, we have integrated for the last 3 years with multiple telco operators around the world, in North America, in Europe, and also in the Middle East. We have been vetted by the network security teams. So we know how to work with the network in the best way and safetiest way. And the slides are a bit stuck now. There you go. But we're also here talking about cybersecurity, and this is something that we need to offer, right? When it comes to our deployments, we have, let's say, 4 layers of cybersecurity, starting from the devices itself, from the hardware, from the network, from the infrastructure, and our platform. We're following the standards in the industry, and basically we're working together with each of the leaders of these industries to ensure that our operations are fully secure. We have a track record already with this product, right? From Canada to Spain to the UK to Latin America and of course in Europe. This is a reality today. It's deployed commercially, and basically that. If the slides allow me, I think the videos are very heavy, so basically these are our trusted partners, starting with GSMA. As I mentioned in the beginning, we've been working together with the Foundry for the last 2 years, and it has been great supporters of our technology. But also, here is a mix of telco operators, hyperscalers, and industry leaders that help us to push for this product on it. With that, I'm just going to finish here. Thank you very much for your time. We are excited. We have a live demo, a simulator, at the booth of the Foundry. So if you are interested to see how it looks like and test it yourself, please, we're welcome to have you there. Thank you.
So thanks very much. So hopefully that's kind of brought together some of the technologies which you've been hearing about today and yesterday, brought that to life in terms of how that can be implemented, and that creates the platform that can enable the products and services which we're seeing launched this week by Unmanned Life become a reality. Just a little bit of a shout out for the GSMA Foundry. You kind of saw there the work that we've done with them. We kind of helped to give them the platform to build new partnerships and grow and be able to bring new kind of insight into the work that we're doing. And we look to do that for other partners going forward, really using it as a hub to very much showcase the best use of 5G technologies and other technologies like cloud, like eSIM, like IoT. So I think with that, we'll probably call it a morning. Up next after lunch, we've got protecting businesses and their end users with the power of mobile operated data and APIs. That'll be very much looking at how do we use the networks, as I said earlier on, to protect customers and improve their user experience for enterprises that can integrate those pieces of data. And with that all said, I think it's now lunchtime. I think there is a lunch outside, so please do go and enjoy. Thank you very much.